Mhm.
Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction. So thank you all for being here, Phyllis and Nancy. We really appreciate having you. And I'm Dr. Patricia Perea. I work at the NHCC as an educator, but I also teach at the University of New Mexico in Chicano and Chicana Studies. And the NHCC is working with Bookworks. We have worked with them actually a lot to bring in writers to these readings and to the community and introduce all of us to these writers that I personally think everybody should read. So before we let Elizabeth read, though, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction. So this is her book, Mona at Sea, that she's going to be reading from. But first, an intro. Before becoming a writer, Elizabeth was a waitress, a upholster, an Avon lady, and an opera singer. Props for being an Avon lady. Her stories and essays have appeared in the Idaho Review, the Rumpus, Story South, Pank, and elsewhere, and have received numerous Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net nominations. She's an alum of Breadloaf Writers Conference, Tin House Writers Workshop, and Lit Camp. In 2021, she was a regular contributor to Plowshare's blog. Her first novel, Mona at Sea, was a finalist in the 2019 SFWP Literary Awards, judged by Carmen Maria Machado, and is forthcoming June 2021, which is what you have in your hands right now, or on your screen. I don't know, depends on how you're reading it. From Santa Fe Writers Project. Originally from South Texas, specifically Laredo and Corpus, Elizabeth now lives with her family in Oakland, California. So her website is online. You all can check out her website. And actually, I had not seen this before, but she actually has a trailer for her book, which I had never seen. So that was pretty cool. All right, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Bookworks, and thank you so much to the NHCC for having me. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I'm just going to read a little bit of the book. This is towards the beginning. The book, if anybody hasn't read it, it's a dark comedy about a young woman who goes through a long period of unemployment and has to figure out what she's going to do with the rest of her life. It's set during the Great Recession, and she finds herself living back with her parents after college graduation in suburban Tucson. So this is 2009, and Mona is feeling dispirited and bitter, and now she gets to have dinner with her family. That night, I go into the kitchen and find my brother Danny leaning against the counter looking at his phone. He's wearing his El Presidente sweatshirt, one of the many gifts and honors conferred unto him after assuming the presidency of the Chi Chi Theta fraternity. Don't talk, he says, holding up one hand. I peer over his shoulder. A teenage boy in a shopping cart perched at the top of some concrete A teenage boy sits in a shopping cart perched at the top of some concrete steps. The boy finishes a beer, tosses the can, someone off camera starts a countdown, and the shopping cart begins its inevitable flight. I look away. Seeing someone break their neck is not going to improve my day. These pledges are nuts, Danny screams a second later. Then he puts the phone on the counter and appraises me. Who sucked the cream out of your Twinkie? Why are you here? I want to remind Mom and Dad they still have one kid who doesn't suck. He's jealous. Dyslexic and popular, Danny's grades have always tended toward the left side of the bell curve. How are your classes, I ask. International relations blows. Hey, did you know France and Germany are next to each other? No wonder they were always fighting. I cannot believe we have the same parents. Yeah, Germany used to be over by Turkey, but they moved it during the Schnitzel campaign of 1812. Oh, he says uncritically. So how's the job search going? I don't want to talk about that. It must be hard. I mean, if you can't get a job, I'm pretty much screwed, huh? Probably, I say, appreciating the compliment. Mom said she wants us to go to a networking thing together. I shake my head, physically shuddering at the idea. Do what you want, but I never would have made president if I didn't leave my room. Thanks, but I don't think I need advice from someone whose resume includes judging a wet t-shirt contest. Being only 16 months apart, Danny and I have been side by side for over 2 decades, and yet the gulf between who we are and how we live in the world seems to widen year by year. As Danny likes to point out when I decline picante sauce or come back from the beach with sunburned shoulders, our parents had one Mexican kid, him, and one white kid, me. Looking at a family photo, it would seem my father and mother independently budded us like Hydra, Danny growing from a lump on our father's neck and me from our mother's. His gentle teasing is well-intentioned, but underscores the truth that my skin tells a different story than my last name, a contradiction I wear into every job interview and family reunion. Danny has always seemed to me, by contrast, more united, his body and spirit not bifurcated, but complete. He carries this harmony inside his relaxed posture and easy smile, and I've secretly always envied it, would love to know what it's like to be taken, better or worse, for who I am. The garage door groans awake, signaling my parents' return from work. My dad enters first, car keys between his teeth, clutching file folders, and the travel mug I gave him in the 9th grade printed with the periodic table. My mom follows a minute later, face down and navigating by periphery as her thumbs pound the keypad to finish one more email before dinner. I plan to decline this opportunity to dine with my entire family, but my mother holds white plastic bags of Mexican takeout, and I can smell the cheese enchiladas snug in their styrofoam beds. The temptation is too great. Melted cheese always wins. I watch my brother use a toothpick to spear out all the green peas from his rice, while my father flips through the mail and my mother resets the table, eschewing the plastic cutlery from the taqueria and laying down silverware with a resentful thwonk, her small protest at the unfairness of the second shift. I never noticed it until I moved back in after college, but my mother has always worked 2 jobs, finishing her day at the university to then come home and cook and clean and pay bills and undertake the general air traffic controlling of suburban life. It's surprising in a woman who lists Betty Friedan as a personal hero, and yet this is how it's always been, almost as if arrangements were worked out long ago, compromises calcified into law. I bring a mug from my room, half full of rum and Dr. Pepper, and take several nourishing gulps. There is a vile mood rising in the room like bad cologne. I open my box, ready to flood my body with delicious queso morphines. But there, on top of my enchiladas, splayed haughtily across my food like a grand odalisque, is the thickest, longest, blackest hair I have ever seen, its contours glistening in congealed grease and its aberrance set in high definition against the soft orange of the cheese. Oh my God, I say, shutting the box and standing up from my chair. I'm going to be sick. What's wrong? My mother asks as I stalk to the trash. There's a hair in my food. And I shove the box down amongst coffee grounds and used tissues. My mother tisks. Just one little hair. It was massive. You could have pulled it out, my dad says. You didn't have to waste a whole meal. I don't have to eat hair-covered garbage food. I don't have to turn around to know my parents are exchanging a look, but I pretend to myself that I'm being perfectly rational and reasonable as I drop a bagel in the toaster and open the fridge to look for cream cheese. And that's where I'll stop.
Thank you so much. So what we're going to do for a minute before we do Q&A is we're just going to talk a little bit about the book and kind of where Elizabeth got her inspiration from and how you even started the process of writing, because I really don't know. When did you start writing?
I started writing in 2011, basically. I started writing this book, and it was the first thing I'd ever written. I don't have an MFA. I have an MBA. I went back to school in 2007 to get my MBA, and I graduated in 2008, just a couple months after Lehman Brothers collapsed and Countrywide. And so I spent all of 2009 applying for jobs. I applied to between 300 and 400 jobs. I didn't get anything. And then I got pregnant. And so I found myself staying home with a baby when I thought I was going to be like this career person. And the book, I started, one, as a way to channel my frustrations about what I had just gone through, but two, kind of as a way to like preserve my sanity, taking care of a newborn. And yeah, so I started writing it in 2011, and it was the first thing I'd ever done, and I didn't know how to write a book, and I just kind of had to learn on the way.
Wow, that's incredible. I love that kind of a story because, first of all, and again, I don't know if the three of you who are here have read the book yet or have even gotten a chance to do a little bit of research on it, but how many times, like I was saying earlier, how many times do we even hear about MBAs writing? I mean, like you say that, and it's like all my humanities little muscles and hairs are like MBA. Oh my God. And you seem so nice. But
Well, that's
that's
because I
just
never got a job because I've been a stay-at-home mom ever since. No,
but
I'm
I
joking.
love that.
Yeah, I know a few other people who have MBAs who have written, and it's interesting because I think it does give you a different perspective. Like, and I don't mean like in a crass commercial way. Like, I think people expect you to be like, oh, you're good at marketing or whatever because you have an MBA. You must like know how to sell books and stuff. And I don't mean like that, but I mean like I just think it makes you kind of look at the world a little differently. Like, I'm very interested in macroeconomic trends. I'm very interested in um, like how group behavior can produce economic outcomes and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I don't know. So it's just coming to writing from a little bit of a different perspective. You know, some people are into trees. I'm into, you know, fractals. I don't know. Like,
I loved that. And I actually loved hearing you say that Mona wasn't necessarily supposed to be a likable character, because I've been struggling because I'm like, I know I'm supposed to like her. Like, I want to like her. Like, she's got qualities that I recognize and I appreciate. But then there's moments where I'm thinking like, I she's bugging right now. So anyway, but I loved hearing you talk about like kind of what the inspiration was. Um, so in your bio, it sounds like, so you started the book or you started writing it, but then it sounds like you've really become invested in like the writing community. So doing Bread Loaf, Plowshares, how have those things sort of benefited you, would you say?
yeah, I've spent now 10 years like basically building up my writing career. And when I said I had to learn how to write the book by writing it, like that, finding a network and finding out how to learn to write, where even do you go for information on how to do that, that was all part of the process. I got a little bit plugged into a place in San Francisco called the Writers Grotto. I took a class there, and from that class I learned about this writers conference in California called Lit Camp. And I applied a few times and didn't get in. And then I got waitlisted, and then I got in for real in 2016. And that was a huge turning point in my career because I finally was able to leave my desk and get out in the world and meet other people who were serious about writing. I had met other people who were like, you know, working on a book, but there's a difference between like a hobbyist and somebody who's like really intending to make this a career and who's really committed and able to commit to the craft. And that was the first time that I was like, oh
Hmm.
my God, I'm spending a whole weekend with like 40 other people who are like really doing this. And Adam Johnson was there, and Paul Harding, and some other amazing writers. And that was just the first time that I was like around those kinds of people. And it was so transformative. And after that, um, and I did something kind of clever that weekend. They had an annual talent show. And I can sing. I used to I used to sing opera, and I
Oh,
sang the song from The Little Mermaid, part of that world. And I won the talent show. And so forever afterwards, when I wanted to email somebody from that I met there who like maybe they wouldn't remember me in the sea of people, I was like, I was the Little Mermaid lady. And then they would remember me. And I got some opportunities that came out of that from people I met there. I found my writers group from there, and it was really like plugging into that world. and just, kicking on the door until the door opened finally. And that made all the difference.
Wow, I think you've just taught me something really important. I don't want to be a hobbyist writer. I I need to work harder at getting out there. That's really inspirational to hear.
Well,
This is
it's
a
also it's
conversation.
also about having the time to do it, right? Like, I mean, who has time? And I had to wait years until like my kids were old enough that I could go out of the house for 4 days,
Mm.
and like life wouldn't fall apart. And so I'm not like intending to throw shade or anything on hobbyists because I get it. Like, it's not feasible. Life gets in the way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just thinking though, that mindset, because I think we're all made to feel like we need to really be working. And yeah, we do, right? Because we need to earn money. But there's also this part of me that's like, oh yeah, but there's a way to shift gears into thinking about writing as a career and what that entails. So that's just good to hear for me, right? As a writer. So that those of you who are in the audience, do you all have any questions, or I don't want to call on anybody because my teacher thing will start to take over and I don't want that to happen, but I would love to have or hear some questions from you all. If you have any or any observations. Because then I will keep going. Um, so because you do put yourself out there in this way in the book, um, why do you think it's important? And like I said, my focus is so much on Chicana literature and Chicano studies. Um, why do you think it's important to have a young woman of color, right? Um, talk about this experience of the recession. Like, why do you think that was something that needed to be out there?
I mean, I think it goes back to the oft quoted Toni Morrison line about, if there's a book that you want to read and it hasn't been written, then write it. I mean, I
Mhm.
think like um I in early drafts of the book, I left Mona's ethnicity unspecified because I was
Hmm.
also still working through a lot of my own baggage when it comes to being bi-ethnic. I'm white and Mexican American. And so existing in that space and having a foot in both worlds, but also being in neither world and feeling like you don't belong anywhere.
Right.
It's a really tricky space to inhabit. For me, I'm almost 40. I'm still dealing with it, and I'm probably still going to be writing about this in like 40 years. Um, and I finally got to a point in my writing, but also in my thinking where I could say something about it, where I did have something to say. And so then it became really important for me to say that Mona is bi-ethnic, that like in the passage I just read, that her skin tells a different story from her last name. And again, like I hadn't seen a Chicana character like that in literature. And so I wanted to talk about it. I think there are a lot of people who feel one way on the inside, but the world sees a different thing on the outside. And I just was hoping that that could be relatable to people across a broad spectrum of identities and intersections.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's important. And I mean, the prejudice I went into with it is obviously your name, Elizabeth Gonzales Jones, the book. I was like ready for it to be about a Chicana, right? So it's fascinating to hear you say that that wasn't where you started. And I think that's really, really something that we don't think about a lot of the time as writers or readers of color. So that's nice to hear that you were going in with it that way.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I also like I want readers to be aware, and this is usually not Mexican readers, but white readers. I want readers to be aware that like the Latinx community comes in literally every shade in the rainbow, you know, like people in the same family look so many different ways.
Yeah.
And so I'm not like trying to educate or anything, but it's like, you know, hey, this is how reality is. And if you didn't grow up, you know, in the Southwest, you may not necessarily know that, or yeah. So I don't know, that also seemed like this is a part of it, and I want people to know that.
I mean, that was a real punch sort of in the gut, that moment when, spoiler alert, just real quick, I don't think this is a big deal yet. So if you've read it, you know it. If you haven't, it's not going to ruin the book for you at all. But when her parents are fighting and her mom says something about her parents being upset about marrying her dad. And I was like, oh, that's one of those moments where it really came in. And it was clear why, because she said something about being a gardener's son. And I was like, there's that piece there. It's not like the ruling piece of the book by any means, but that's also what makes it exceptional, in that it's precisely not the ruling piece of that. So I really thought that was really subtle, but well done.
Thank you.
Does anybody want to add anything to this? We have some quiet people. Let's see, there's something in the chat. I think coming from a business world, going into the writing world is so interesting. Also coming from being a stay-at-home mom, deciding on a writing career. Also being Latinx. Please discuss these three foundational influences. My background is poetry and philosophy, so your background interests me. And that's from Nancy.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Let's see. So the stay-at-home mom piece is interesting because, like I said, I started writing this book in 2011, and it just came out this year, and so it was a really long process to get it published. By the time so I should just say quickly like how that happened, but I finished it in 2015. I got an agent. The agent put the book out on submission, and it went out to like 45 editors, and everybody said it's hilarious, we love it, we don't know how to market it, and nobody ended up picking it up. So I put it in a drawer for the most part, and then in 2019 I sent it to the Santa Fe Writers Project, and they have an annual literary awards, and I was just thinking I might get an honorable mention or something, and then to my complete shock I was named a finalist, and they offered me a contract for publication. So I didn't work on it between 2016 and 2019, and in that time period I had actually written a completely different book. I'd grown a lot as a person, as a writer. I was just older, more mature, and in the first version of it that went on submission, the parents were just kind of existed antagonistically. They were not characterized very well. And when I came back to it in 2019, 2020, getting it ready for publication, I was able at that point I had 9-10 years of experience as a mom under my belt. And I was able to look at her parents, and especially her mom, in such a different light, with so much more compassion and less judgment. Whereas when I first started writing it, I had been a mom for like 6 months or something, and I was just kind of writing in little snatches of time. I typed part of the rough draft literally with my daughter like asleep on my shoulder, like typing with one hand. And at that point it was just about like, how quickly can I tell the story, how can I get this, how can I get, you know, the words on the page. But having all that time to ruminate on it all those years, and just growing and being a better person by that point, I was certainly informed by my experience being a stay-at-home mom, and was able to use that to to just have a lot more compassion, a lot more empathy for Mona's parents, and to make them better, more fully rounded characters on the page, I hope. And as to the business background, I mean, I spoke about like being able to kind of look at things in a slightly different way, I think, than other writers. It also gave me, I think, an interesting vocabulary. Like I did another panel last month with the Writers Center, and they asked me about language. Like I have one chapter about sunk costs, which is a business concept where you basically don't want to throw good money after bad. If an investment isn't working out, if it's lost, millions of dollars, don't keep spending money to try to get it to work. Like just say, okay, that didn't work and we have to eat that. That's called a sunk cost. And it was like things like that where I think that I can maybe create a little like slightly different metaphors, just having that business background. And yeah, I'm interested in kind of behavioral economics and the decisions that people make. And I just find that stuff super fascinating. I'm nerdy and listen to like the Economist podcast and stuff. And so I bring all that to the writing. And certainly coming from a poetry and philosophy background, there is ample material to work with there. My husband used to be a philosophy professor, and he a lot of his research actually informed the book as well. He worked on conditions under which life is meaningful, and Mona is definitely searching for those. So I think that that sounds like a great background for writing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nancy. Anybody else want to put something into the chat or unmute themselves and ask a question? Actually, Nancy's question sort of made me think like, and this is probably the question all writers get, but I'm just curious, who are some of your favorites?
I really love George Saunders and Kurt Vonnegut. They're two of my favorites. I mean, I have like 70 favorites, but I love how weird they both are. I think that my writing is getting weirder the older I get. And I love their weirdness, but they're both so empathetic. It goes back to what I was saying before. I want to have empathy for people. I want to have empathy for my characters. George Saunders says that he asks himself, when he's looking at a character, he asks himself, how can I love you more? What is something you could do or say that would make me love you more? And then he puts that into the story. And I want to get to that point eventually where I can write, these terribly flawed people who are doing, who just can't help themselves, but fall into these ridiculous situations. But how can I look at them and know, well, they're doing the best they can. Mm-hmm. And I think writing without judgment is really eventually like where I want to get to. And that's just also how I want to live too, right? Yeah. So Kurt Vonnegut and George Saunders are perennial favorites.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. Anybody else want to ask a question? So I'm going to ask a teacher question now. I'm teaching my intro to Chicana literature, right? How would you want me to teach the book? What would you like me to point out? Oh wait, there's hard. A question again. One more question that's not mine. Let's go to Nancy again. I was a parent in graduate school, so I empathize. Now I'm a retired professor trying to write poetry. I am enjoying your talk very much. I still read philosophy too, like Derrida and Heidegger. That's heavy stuff, Nancy.
Mhm.
I've not tried Heidegger. I have read Derrida, which I know is not the whole picture, but
I keep trying to read Bernard Williams and oh my God, it's so hard. I want to. On the back of the book, it seems like I can do it. And then I open the book and it's like,
covers are deceptive. Absolutely. Um, so yeah, and actually that's a good question because I always do like to put theory into my classes. So how would you think I would teach that? I mean, like, how would you like it to be taught?
that's really hard because I've never taken a literature class.
Mhm.
So I feel like there's probably a framework and I don't know what that would be, but um, I think that I think that the book has a lot of meaning of life
Mhm.
questions in it, and so maybe something with that, um, like
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure who writes on that. But yeah, I think maybe something like that,
Mhm.
or I'm trying to think like from a craft perspective. Um, hmm, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a teacher. That's a really hard question.
Well,
I
I
feel like
think
that wasn't a good answer.
no, you are a teacher because you wrote this. And I know I can guarantee you 100% every student that I have in a class would love this book because I just
Oh,
know
thank
their
you.
style, right? So they would love this book. So I'm just curious because it's like maybe the way I should have asked it is like if you were sitting in the class, like if you can disassociate from yourself and you were sitting in the classroom as yourself and you picked up this book and you were like, wow, because I think everybody would have that reaction, like, wow, we've never read this. And so I can already say like students will want to know more about the character. I
Mm.
know students will relate to the relationship with her brother. Um, I know that if I was, and I do actually think I am going to put this on the syllabus next time I do the literature course.
Oh, thank
I
you.
know that they will all want to know more about like the cultural context and they love the idea of intersectionality, right? Because like we were saying, and those of you who are in the audience, I'm sure all of you have read or know, a fair amount about Latinx literature. And so, to have a character finally who is part of the larger experience of the United States, like we've talked about the Great Recession a million times, but we haven't talked about like what it did for everybody, right? And there's all this conversation about houses that went, into foreclosure and the bailouts and whatever. So it's nice to see it come down to the experience of one person in one particular family that, represents to some degree the experience of so many people in the classroom that I think they would just across the board identify with it. So yeah, I mean, like what Nancy's saying, this would be definitely part of a literary thing where I can think of like reader response, but I can see students just loving this book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really struggled also to find books about unemployment. That was one of the big drivers also for writing the book initially, was that I had just gone through a long experience of unemployment and I was looking for books that were about that and I couldn't find any. I wrote a listicle earlier that came out earlier this summer, books about and underemployment, and even finding 9 books for that listicle was so hard. Like, and the reason is because the experience of unemployment is not something that translates well to a story. When you're unemployed, you sit down at your computer and you send resumes out and you never hear back And then the next day you sit down at your computer and you send resumes out and you never hear back. And you just do that again and again and again until eventually you like give up and move to a cabin in Wyoming, or like you get a job. And or you know, like your cousin's dentist hears about something, and then you get a job that way, and you're like, well, why did I just spend 9 months sending resumes out? But like, it's in a story, things have to happen, and unemployment is completely defined by nothing happening. And it was difficult to translate the experience of unemployment and put it into a story arc. I had to add like other stuff. I had to add other problems that she had. I had to add other characters and things that she could be doing to make a little progress forward in the story. But I would love to see more books written about unemployment and underemployment. Like, the gig economy came out of the Great Recession, right? And the gig economy, I think, has dominated the lives of millennials. And I keep forgetting the name of the people who come next. Is it Generation Alpha or something?
Z.
What is it?
Gen Z.
Gen Z, that's what it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's completely dominated the work lives of millennials and Gen Z, that you're just supposed to string together these side hustles that offer no job security, low pay, no health benefits, nothing benefits. And you know, I want to hear about that in literature. I want that story to be told. And also, you know, what is it like to be, you know, just kind of permanently not part of the system, not
Wow.
part of any of it.
I think that's brilliant. Does anybody want to comment on that? Because that's one of the things I think about too. I feel like my parents' generation is the last generation that gets to have one job with benefits, to buy a house, raise kids, and that's it. Like, there's security. I don't know. I love that. Does anybody want to add anything to that in the chat or unmute yourselves? Because that's, I think, a really important point. Because I think there's millions of people who are no longer going to have the experience of job stability or benefits.
Oh yeah, and I mean the coronavirus too is, you know, going to disrupt so many people's employment lives, and I'm still trying to understand how there are this many people unemployed, but we're not in a recession, and the stock market just keeps going up and up. I've been scratching my head about that one for 18 months. Like I've been reading, you know, like all the financial news, and it's just, I mean, part of it was that Wall Street got bailed out by the Treasury last year, and so that's fine. But I can't understand how the day-to-day lives of people and the like the entire financial system of the United States can be operating under two completely different realities. The one can be decoupled from the other. And that's, if somebody can explain that to me, I would love to hear it. But yeah, and the problems that came out of the Great Recession, we're going to see them just magnified coming out of whenever we eventually come out of the pandemic, which,
and yeah, and that's one of the reasons I think your book is going to relate to students, because I can't tell you how many students I know who had to move home this year. Nancy has another question. She says, I recently moved to New Mexico from California. Did you say you came from Texas? How does that influence your work? My academic work was in North and South American 20th century poetry, which informs my work now. Like in South American literature, did you ever consider magical realism for your work? Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, Texas influences my work tremendously. And I set the book in Tucson for logistical reasons, but it's actually, in my head, I was always writing about Texas. When I talk about the stifling heat and the strip malls and the kind of blandness of the landscape, I'm talking about South Texas, where I grew up. Now, I said it in Tucson because Mona's parents are medical researchers, and I couldn't, where I grew up, there wasn't a university that would have made sense for the setting. But yeah, I'm always writing about Texas. I'm obsessed with Texas. I think all of my short stories are set in Texas. In my literary criticism work, I have written about Texas authors quite a bit. I wrote a second book that I'm still working on. I just realized today I actually have to rewrite from scratch about 7 chapters, and I'm just crying because I'm 5 years into it. Why do I have to do this? But anyway, and that book actually is magical realism. So it's funny that you bring that up. Yes, magical realism is definitely a thing I'm super into. I just did not do it for this book. But yeah, it's set in Mexico and Texas, the whole book. And it's magical realism. And it's actually about my great grandfather. He was a bandito who got shot by the Texas Rangers, and they left him for dead. But he lived, and they called him El Tragabalas, or the bullet swallower. And so that's what the book is called, The Bullet Swallower. And it's partly about that legend, and then also about like 6,000 other things. And it's just like, it's so long and it's so complicated, and I just can't even.
Wow, that sounds
awesome.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
That sounds great. I can't wait to read that. That sounds spectacular.
I also can't wait to read it.
There's so much literature. I went to school at UT Austin. There's so much literature on Mexican lynchings now coming out, like history, that I think would be super useful. That's an amazing story.
There's so much that's come out in the last few years, because I started researching that book in 2015, and I feel like so much has come out just since then.
Yeah.
It's like all of a sudden everybody realized that, like, oh my God, the Texas Rangers are really racist.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, Elizabeth, you just spoke to my heart. Nancy said she's looking forward to that one for sure. Me too. I can't wait to read that. Anybody else have any questions? Wyatt, I'm not sure what you said our time was. Now I'm getting lost if it was an hour and a half or an hour, or what was it?
Because of the license. I mean,
right.
We're good for whatever. I mean, we can stop or we can keep going, or.
Okay. Nancy has another question. What will the title be? I think for the bullet swallower. Your Spanish was too fast for me.
Oh yeah, the bullet swallower.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which an Argentinian friend of mine kindly pointed out that bullet swallow, well, El Tragabalas in Argentina is apparently a very not nice word for gay men. And he was like, don't call your book that, but that's what I'm calling it. So.
Well, if it's just Argentina can deal with it. I've never heard it for Mexico, so I think
I haven't either.
Or for those of us who are very, very heritage Spanish speakers. Anybody else want to add anything, Holly or Phyllis? Or Wyatt, not to put you on the spot, but.
Oh, no. I most of the Zooms, I tend to find like old white men just like trying to put their words out. So I try and stay back and quiet.
You're fine as long as you don't start it with, well, this is more of a comment than a question.
Yeah. Here's my
Don't
question.
be that guy.
What I, when you were talking about empathy and really getting to know, I had this wonderful conversation about Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote Nonviolent Communication. And in his work, when working with people and their trauma, he would be able to say what the perpetrator of a trauma would say to someone, like the language of words that they would use, by being super empathetic. And his kind of what I took out of the conversation was that he said, this person who did damage, created trauma, is no different than me. Like the super spiritual aspect is that I am you and you are me. And that person has a different history of hurt and trauma in their own life. And it brought that up. And I was just, and wanting to, in my eagerness to share or put like, oh, there's this stuff and this thing and these books on over poverty. And I kept, the book about the what's it called? The Louisiana. I can't remember the title of it, but there's like a American Made. That's a book coming out this fall about, what happens when, you don't have your job anymore. And like, evicted. So it's like, you see, like what you're talking about is you see a lot of books about, poverty or homelessness, like this symptom of the inability to get work. And so there's like that, like, you're going out looking for this thing that you can't find, or, from a bit, what I've been hearing from other small businesses is that finding people to work right now is not as easy as you would have thought it would have been. So it's the pandemic kind of is like life breaking up with everybody.
Yeah.
And there's so much stuff that's come to light, and like the issues around mental wellness, mental health, and those conversations that are happening is just fantastic. That stuff that used to be swept under the carpet or put in a closet or shipped to a thing or tried to get prayed away, that those things are being discussed, and maybe not well. And I'm sorry that I don't have a question. I just was wanting to I don't know, not really, just I feel like your book is going to bring up conversations, and like when you talked about the rainbow of Latinx, of people being who they are, not just who they appear to be. And having that conversation about, and then all the bullying that happens around the name calling of not being what someone says that you are. I kind of picture it like someone says that you're a Hawaiian shirt. You're like, I'm not a Hawaiian shirt. I don't want to put that idea or that belief that you have of me on. Anyway, I'm kind of getting into super rambly, so I'll stop.
You're actually not, because that's the other thing I think young people are going to relate to in this book, is there is some mental health stuff happening in this book that, again, like I said, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but, the things that she struggles with her own, like, not just depression, but sense of worthlessness, the way that she hurts herself, right? Again, when I was reading that, I was thinking like, wow, I'm gonna have to move my computer because the battery's dying. But I was thinking, wow, that's not something that people in our communities talk about at all either, right? And it's something that I saw people experience all year and a half. And like I said, I know your book is situated, earlier in time, but it's going to be super relevant to people now who have had to go home, had to live with their parents, lose their jobs, whatever job they're coming to now is mostly a gig job, right? Just like you were talking about, that's all that you have. Or like what Wyatt was saying, you're making sacrifices all over the place because it's like, are you going to go back to the job where you got literally nothing, right? Or are you going to hold out for something better? Or are you eventually going to have to just, get a job, and it doesn't have anything to do with maybe what you wanted, what you went to school for, or anything. So that's where I think students are, or not students, I speak about it as students because obviously I'm always thinking about my classes, but that's where I think it's going to really relate to, is that everybody kind of had some mental issues that they had to deal with all of a sudden. And the book really does address that. And I was so grateful to see that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I did a lot of research. So I don't think it's a spoiler because it comes out in the first chapter, but Mona is a cutter. She engages in self-harm. And I did a ton of research into the psychology of cutting and exactly like why and how a person engages in self-mutilation. And it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people who will never admit that they did it, have done it, whatever, because it is so stigmatized. But yeah, it's mental health during the pandemic, I'm sure has just been awful for a lot of people, not being able to deal with different things, not having anybody to talk to, or having their usual outlets closed to them. And yeah, it's one of the many tragedies among so many tragedies of the last year and a half. As to the employment piece, I did want to mention one book that I read that is it's amazing for a number of reasons, but it is the best book I've ever seen that really talks about the kind of late capitalist employment world that we find ourselves in. And it's called Temporary by Hilary Leichter. It came out last year. It came out like March of 2020. So probably the worst time ever for a book to come out. And it's very surrealist. It's about this young woman who's a temp, and she fills in for a CEO. She fills in for a ghost. She fills in for a pirate. Like, her temp assignments are insane. But as she goes through the novel in all of these different temporary places, searching for, she wants the permanence. That's what it's called. And it's like a little ambiguous what the permanence is, but you get the feeling that it's a lot more than just a permanent job. It's like a whole, it's like nirvana, like your soul becomes complete or something once you find the permanence. And yeah, it's because it's so bizarre. I think that it really does such an amazing job at showing like just how nutty our current workforce situation is, that you can work all these hours and not have any benefits and not have any financial stability, and then still have people tell you like, well, you just have to work hard. Well, I mean, my dad worked hard. He, certainly never had anything to show for it. So come on.
Right. Oh, that's brilliant. Yes. And like I said, that's exactly, I think, why this book will speak to so many people. So see, Wyatt, you weren't offline at all. You were right there. This is from Nancy again. She says, if you write the title in English, oh, she's talking about the bullet swallower. If you write the title in English, it loses its gay reference because it is not used that way in English. So don't worry about it. Good title for your grandfather's story. I'm bilingual and it doesn't seem like a problem to me. I love the possibilities in magical realism forms, surrealist or speculative forms for the content.
I agree.
I'm intrigued. I can't wait to get to that one.
Oh, thank you.
Anybody else want to add anything to the chat?
I want to say congratulations of navigating the publishing world, because that is, that's, I'm a bookseller, and you know, it's like going down by the bay. You know, it just seems like totally very difficult that people can go and get their work published, and going through all the hoops. Like there's so many hoops, and even though there's so many options in publishing, it's very difficult. And so I commend you. Keep working. It took Gabriela Garcia Marquez a decade to write and complete Cien Años de Soledad. You know, you have your entire life to write your first book, and got that under your belt. So it's the next work. I think where you're going sounds phenomenal. It just keep at it.
Thank you.
Actually, to follow up in total self-interest, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking I'm teaching a class called Chicana Cultural Expressions this semester. This would actually be a perfect book to add in there.
Nice.
So I can force students to buy it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to do a classroom visit too.
Yeah, we all agree with Nancy right there. Fiction publishing is so different from poetry. They both require their own kind of investment in time. I know that my stuff is mostly poetry, but I did venture into fiction a couple of months ago, and I'm like, eek, this is so hard. Or academic writing. My other thing is academic writing.
It's hard. Somebody wrote like a blog post that went viral a few years ago, talking about how they aim to get 100 rejections a year. And I took that really seriously. And I haven't been sending stuff out this year because I got a regular gig with Plowshares blog, but in previous years, I have gotten 100 rejections, which when you work it out, that's like one every 3 days. And so, once every 3 days, you're getting a disappointing email. And the benefit of it is that I, get that door shut in my face, and it's like, oh, that sucks. Okay, next,
You are an inspiration. I swear. I I want to put you in my phone to be like, help me with my insecurity today, Elizabeth. Tell me I can get a rejection and it's all good.
You can get a rejection. Awesome. The first one sting, and then like the 300th one is like, okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and like I talked about how my book got turned down by 40 to 45 editors. At the time, I was devastated. Obviously, it was my first book, and nobody wanted to publish it. But the other feedback I got from editors was, well, we don't want to buy this one, but tell her to write another one, and we'll look at it. And I was like, I got so close my first try. Most people don't even finish a book, much less get an agent, much less like get to go on submission. And I was like, they want another book. Okay, I'll write another book. And I'm so thankful now that I failed. And it sounds weird, but like the worst thing that can happen when you write a book is that nobody publishes it. And that happened to me, and I lived through it, and the sun came up the next day, and I still wrote another book. And actually my writing got immeasurably better after that experience too. And so like, I'm so thankful for the failure. And I couldn't have said that, 5 years ago or whatever. Like when I was first starting out, if you would have told me, oh, this book isn't going to sell to a big publisher, I would have been like, okay, well, I guess I'm not a writer then. But now looking back, everything worked out exactly the way that it should have worked out. And now I know that about myself, that I can get back up after failing, that I can dust myself off, that I will still keep going, and that I have the ability to bounce back.
And that's the part that I think I really appreciate your talk. And I'm sure everybody else in the audience appreciates this too. is especially when it comes to fiction. And Nancy's talking about academic publishing, right? Because it's targeted. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Nancy. Like, we see the call for papers or the call for journals and we can submit. One of the things I love about what you're saying, Elizabeth, when it comes to fiction, though, is we don't actually hear successful writers talk about this as much. I mean, you have the really successful writers, like the Stephen Kings or those guys kind of talk about like the struggle of publishing, but you hear that as a writer and you're like, yeah, whatever, you're Stephen King. Mm-hmm. But you don't hear like Chicana writers who are publishing smaller and local African-American writers, women writers. You just don't hear that struggle as much. So it's nice to hear the struggle and to hear the determination, because that is also something that I see so many writers struggle with, right? They get one rejection, two rejections, and then that's kind of it. They're out of the game. So it's nice to hear this perspective too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a tragedy when, that makes me so sad when I hear you say that. Like, I mean, people can reject a piece for the stupidest reasons, like you, yeah, that's just a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's good because now, like I said, so Nancy says, you go, girl. She loved hearing your struggle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for contributing. Yeah. So it's like, I can see how so many people would love and should love this book when they get to it. So I think that's about it. We're like at an hour and a half. Does anybody want to add anything before we go? I don't know if it's raining in Albuquerque, but we got some sprinkles here. I will say, I hope you make it to Santa Fe and Albuquerque, because you do have to check out Bookworks in person. It's it's probably my favorite bookstore in Albuquerque, but also Santa Fe is just awesome to come up to Santa Fe. And right, you said you were an opera singer. We have one of the best operas in, I would say, the country. Santa Fe Opera is beautiful. The whole opera opens out to the mesas. So it's like you have the opera, but behind you see the whole west like side, so you can see the sunset and everything. So the Santa Fe Opera is incredible.
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bookworks, and thank you so much, NHCC, for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and thank you everybody for coming. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Bookworks put the Santa Fe Opera in there. Yay. So I have your contact. So I really am going to contact you to come to the class, because I'm going to go ahead and add that to my list. I was looking back at my list, and I sent it out to the students already, but they can add one more. Nobody's going to cry. They'll be fine.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.